This is Dr. George. This is Citizens Gone Wild, and I have a few things to say, some of which you may agree with. I was thinking the other day, or wondering, are we still much of a democracy? Of course, we have the accoutrements of democracy. We have regularly scheduled elections. In spite of some bugs from time to time, they're honest elections, honest count, I think. And we have two parties that contend for leadership in the country. We have all of that. But there are a couple of things kind of bother me about our democracy. One is that fewer and fewer decisions are made by democratic means. More and more decisions are made by judges and the bureaucracy. By the way, can you name one federal bureaucrat whose name you know? I don't know a single one. And let's take a look at New Jersey, for example. In New Jersey, judges, not the people, judges have decided, made a few momentous decisions. They didn't cause me to stutter, but they have made some decisions. For example, we now have an affordable housing, ongoing affordable housing project in New Jersey. And if you want to build housing anywhere, you are obligated to produce also some housing that is affordable, lower cost. Each town is assigned a certain number of affordable housing units. Now, this is not a bad idea. It's kind of nice, but it's the kind of idea that should be decided by the people. Judges weren't made into judges to make these sort of policy decisions, not at all. And I know a lot of people agree with the decision, so they say, oh, it's okay. Let's look at another one. The Supreme Court in New Jersey has totally upended the tax system in New Jersey and basically have pretty much total control over the budget of the state of New Jersey. Now, the budgets of states are made up of two major elements: public safety, police, and education. The Supreme Court in New Jersey has made a decision as to what will happen to the tax system and what will happen to the funding of education in New Jersey. Never mind whether you agree or disagree. The point is, shouldn't this be made by the people of this country? What the Supreme Court in New Jersey has decided is that we're not spending enough on kids who grow up in poverty. And so they have commanded that in New Jersey, as much money will be spent on poor children, they call it the 28 poor districts, as is spent in the 100 richest districts. And which maybe it doesn't bother the rich that much. They are still spending as much as they wish on their education of their children. And it sure doesn't bother the poorer students. But the middle class is getting crushed, because to get the money that you need to send to the poor districts, you basically tax the middle class. In New Jersey, right now, there are 28 districts classified as poor districts. Each of them will have as much money spent per student as is spent in a rich district, let's say Bernardsville. This is what this means in practice. If you go to a middle class school, if you live in a middle class neighborhood, middle class town, go to a middle class school, about $18,000 per student will be spent on your children. If, however, you are in Asbury Park or other poor districts, whether you're here legally or illegally, it doesn't matter, you will have $28,000 spent on your children. Now, maybe that's a righteous thing to do. I don't know what you think about it. But the point is, if the local governments are supposed to be in charge of education, not the state judiciary. And how do they feel they have the right to do this? Well, there's a phrase in the Constitution that says every district is obligated to have a thorough and efficient education for its children. That's it, 3 words, and they have upended everything. They are the reason we have a sales tax as high as it is in New Jersey. The point is, this is gut level. This is basic. That the local district is in charge of education, and really, we're not in charge of anything anymore. And we're talking about substantial amounts of money. First of all, $18,000 per student is not chicken feed. Secondly, to tell the middle class that they're going to have to cough up $10,000 more per student for students to live in poor district is kind of high-handed. Where does this come from? How is this democratic? Look, if you control the budget, you control the government. There are only 2 major elements in the state government: police and schools. And the state Supreme Court in New Jersey and elsewhere as well, but in New Jersey has just taken total control of education, of school education, and they've just made this thing up that they want more money spent on poorer kids. Regardless of whether you like that or not, it is not democratic. Either democracy has real results and is meaningful, or it's just a charade. And I think we're approaching charade level in New Jersey. This is typical of what has happened throughout the nation, where the courts have come in and taken over entire sectors of our public life and made decisions backed by, well, no one much except the people on the Supreme Court of that state. I'm not sure if we're still a functioning democracy in New Jersey. I'm just not sure anymore. And this is part of the reason why people like myself, and I hope there's more than one, maybe related, maybe not, who feels this way. We now have all sorts of programs that really were not approved by any governing body, by any democratically elected body. Let's take an issue like affirmative action. Affirmative action started very, very small under Nixon and Lyndon Johnson, and it has grown like topsy. And now, basically, if you apply for a federal job, a state job, a local job, if you apply to a private business, if you apply to be a professor, if you apply for just any position, whether you get it or not, and whether you get a scholarship or not, is now dominated by the question, who are you? The government will let you give you a job if you're this color, but not that color but not this color. And this is causing, I think, tremendous unfairness. But in addition, how the hell is that democratic? What difference does it make if you vote and vote and vote? And at the end, when it comes crunch time, the courts basically decide together with the bureaucracy. Now, you may be wondering, how does bureaucracy come in this? Why do so many people, so many programs have affirmative action when the people don't want it? There's a little tiny bureaucracy called the Federal Contract Compliance Agency in the federal government. They look over every single contract that's made with the federal government. There's something similar at the state and local level as well. And they decide whether they will allow you to have a contract to build airplanes, to pave a road, to do anything. They can decide on the spot by themselves, consulting no one but themselves, when they will allow the contract or not. First of all, most people don't even know this agency exists. Second of all, they decide things on the basis of race, gender, sexual orientation. Thus, they will give a contract if you promise to hire people who have this skin color, but not that skin color. They have tremendous power, tremendous. If you want to do business with the federal government, which a lot of people do, or the state government or the local government, you have to pass through this eye of the needle. And we were ending up with all sorts of I think, undemocratic, unwarranted, and illegitimate policies. Right now, of all things, a group that, this is incredible, a group that does too well, Asian students, are in the courts continuously now because they are not being allowed in numbers that their excellence would indicate they should be allowed. Thus, they're suing Harvard. I don't know who they're suing right now, but I'm sure they'll keep at it. In other words, they do so well on taking tests, on working hard, that they outscore, well, whites, but mainly they outscore blacks and Hispanics by a ton. And if you, we started out with the idea of merit-based everything. And especially in regard to college and universities, we have this idea, or at least we had this idea, that people should be admitted to the better schools based on their excellence in their test scores, their grades, their extracurricular activities, everything. But then we started to get an influx of a lot of Asian students, and the Asian students were doing better than anyone else, much better than anyone else, better than whites, but much better than blacks and browns and pinstripe folks. And so here we are in this total craziness, where we're saying you're too smart, you can't go here. You work too hard, you can't go here. It's just making people crazy with anxiety and kind of horror at what we're doing. My point now is I don't know what we have. We don't have a merit-based system, okay. We have a race-based system, but also a gender-based system. Whatever it is, it's not what the founding fathers have thought of, and it's not what I have thought of, and it's not, most Americans are against this, but they have no ability to do anything. Democracy, which should be dealing with this, has proved itself helpless before this, I would call it a leftist onslaught. We just don't have any way to grasp hold of this problem and deal with it. And we don't deal with it directly, and we get worn out and we say, all right, the hell with it. Just get your degree and let's get out of here. But I think this has very corrosive effects. And if people don't believe in democracy, then I think we're in a lot of trouble. And people have to believe in democracy, or we will be in a lot of trouble. I think we already are. I think that we ought to think about this. There's one other thing. In effect, what has happened in America is that for a while, Republicans were doing, according to Democrats, too well in the elections. And so the Democrats, some would say, decided that they would have to bring in millions, tens of millions of new voters who would definitely vote for them. They are called Hispanics. They made up this category, which is non-existent in the rest of the world. We're the only place in the world that has a category of things called Hispanics. No one else is Hispanics. Hispanics don't call themselves Hispanics. But anyway, Hispanics are one of the privileged groups, along with blacks, who get all sorts of benefits. They get into schools with lower grades and test scores. They get jobs because they are Hispanic, and on and on and on like this. I'm not sure if we're a democracy if one side can bring in tens of millions of people who will almost certainly vote for them. If it is a democracy, it's one that Plato and Aristotle never thought of. All right, now we get to the you don't know diddly section here. What percentage of Latinos think of themselves as white? This is kind of interesting because the Democrats are always trying to push the Latinos to emphasize their color identity. Well, this may be a surprise to you. There are about 59 million Hispanics in the country. Of those, 66% think of themselves as white. Think of it, 66% of the people who are identified as Hispanics think of themselves as white. And speaking of other strange things here, Jews in Israel are under attack at every university, every major university in the United States. The department that is in the lead of yelling at Jews is gender studies. I have a list here of gender study programs that have condemned Israel. It is much too long to read, I won't bother you with it. But lately, everyone seems to be ganging up on Israel, such a small country, so many enemies. Still, they prosper. The Scientific American is senior editor Sunya Ashad Bhuta wrote this: "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Now, the river is the Jordan, the sea is the Mediterranean, and in between are dead Jews. That's what it means. And that's what has become of one of the premier magazines and source of scientific information in America. By the way, here's something kind of very strange but interesting. Iran is having kind of a Christian boom. Now, Iran is the country with all the fanatic folks in charge, the religious fanatics in charge here. But of all things, Christianity is flourishing now, considering the small percentage, it may not mean that much. But of all things, one of the few areas of growth in religion is amongst the Christians. Fewer and fewer actually identify as Muslim, especially the young people. But the Christian population is growing. It's still quite small, but it's interesting that it's growing. And now, in my continuing attempt to explain critical race theory, I'm going to say this. What happens in history, at least during the last few centuries, is every once in a while, someone will come along and say, I've got the key to history. I've got the key to understanding mankind's history. And they'll come up with something. Freud will come up with sex. That's the thing that we have to focus on to understand humanity. And then Marx will come along and he'll say, no, 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 economics, that's what we have to focus on to understand humanity and where it's been and where it's going. What the critical race theory people would come along and said is, no, 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 you're all wrong. It's race. We have to pay attention to race. If we want to understand race, that's the key. If we understand race and its history and what it is doing now, then we will understand mankind. I don't know if that helps. I hope it does. They just picked up on something new to emphasize. By the way, the word Palestinian is used all the time now. What a lot of people don't realize is that the word was invented in 1968. The propaganda services of the Soviet Union, which was still in existence then, said, look, you terrorists have got a very bad reputation because you're terrorists. And well, we need a different name for you. Why don't we call you Palestinians? And that way it'll seem like you're a pure group of refugees that have been thrown out of your own land. And people will feel sad and they will back you. And this is what happened. But let's listen to these people. The Palestinian people does not exist. The creation of a Palestinian state is only a means for continuing our struggle against the state of Israel for Arab unity. Only for political and tactical reasons do we speak today about the existence of the Palestinian people, since Arab national interests demand that we posit the existence of a distinct Palestinian people to oppose Zionism. In other words, they want to crush the Jews and replace them with Arab Muslims. Here's a statement by a high-up guy, Zuhair Mushin, a member of the PLO Executive Council. That's the Palestinian Authority, the most important, I guess, organization of so-called Palestinians there is. For tactical reasons, Jordan, which is a sovereign state with defined borders, cannot raise claims to Haifa and Jaffa. As a Palestinian, I can undoubtedly demand Haifa, Jaffa, Beersheba, and Jerusalem. However, the moment we reclaim our right to all of Palestine. We will not even wait a minute to unite Palestine and Jordan. It shows you the power of the media, and they keep talking as if there's a group of people actually called Palestinians. And there aren't. It's a made up category, made up to intimidate and get the upper hand in the propaganda wars against Jews. Speaking of Jews, we have something new. We thought we had all of our enemies lined up, but excuse me, it turns out that more people are joining the fray in attacking Jews in Israel. Public school teachers, their unions, the unions on the East Coast, the West Coast, have from all over. Here's one, the Seattle Education Association passed a resolution endorsing boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. Like we don't have enough enemy. Here's one, CUNY, that's the City University of New York, law school, dean defends people who've been screaming at Jews. The interim dean and Professor Eduardo Capolon said the school officials have looked at the situation and they think it's just okay. And it's not really anti-Semitic. And besides, these people have a right to say what they want. By the way, the dean could, if he wants to say something, come to the defense of Israel, but apparently that is not appealing to him. New York University, AAUP. AAUP is the American Association of University President and Professors, and they're the most important professorial organization there is. They made a statement they don't want to have any cooperation with Tel Aviv campuses, any colleges in Israel that are located in Tel Aviv. They want the school to pass a pledge of non-cooperation. You would think that Israel was the main source of problems in the planet. Here's another one. New York University affiliates join faculty group in boycott of Tel Aviv University. This is so stupid. It's bigotry, but it's idiotic bigotry. By the way, speaking of saying something in the defense of nice white people, there's news and then there's news to report. There's history and then there's history that is mentioned in the news. How many of you knew about this? In post-war Civil War, after the Civil War, tens of thousands of white teachers, mainly from New England, went south, set up schools for Black children in the South during Reconstruction, embodying a contrasting culture, won the prize, self-restraint, industriousness, and order, all conservative virtues. W.E.B. Du Bois, perhaps one of the greatest, perhaps the greatest African-American thinker, theoretician, historian, political scientist, wrote, "This was the finest thing that had happened in American history." I want to end by telling you a strange thing that happened to me, a delightful strange thing that happened to me. Having nothing better to do, I went wandering around this Sunday, looking for a little carpet to put in the entryway of our house so you can wipe off your feet and not get any mud or whatever else that's out there in the house. And I went to one store and they came up with this carpet and they said it was $11. And I said, well, that's a little too much. I was not in the mood to spend that much on a little piece of carpet. They used to be called carpet remnants and they were sold for $1 a piece. So I guess I'm still living back in the day. Anyway, while I was there, I started talking to this lady behind me and I guess she took note of what was going on. I put the carpet back and I left. I went to the next store to take a look if they had it. I believe it was Marshall's. And while I'm there shuffling amongst the carpet selection they had there, this lady comes up to me and says, here, and she gives me the bag with the carpet that I thought was too expensive. And I said, what's this? She says, here, just take this. And I said, well, how much do I owe you? And she said, nothing. And I said, well, why are you doing this? And she said, well, I was just raised that way. She insisted I take the carpet, which I did, and I went home and took it in place. And I thought it was such a strange and wonderful encounter that I mention it, that there are people like that out there, just being nice for no particular reason, no ideology, no cause, just being nice. So I thought I'd end on that note, and I hope to see you next Monday.